This woman named Celia destroyed her entire life in less than a year. And the shocking part? She says she has zero regrets. At 32 years old, she lost her marriage, her career, her family, and every friendship she'd built over the years. All because she refused to do one simple thing: lie about her emotions. Today on Mrs. Emma, I'm bringing you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about love, honesty, and the price we pay for following our hearts. I'm Emma, your storyteller, and trust me, you'll want to hear every single detail of what happened to Celia. Let me take you back to where this all began. Celia's story starts 3 years ago when she married a man named Finn. By all accounts, their relationship looked picture perfect from the outside. Finn worked a steady office job managing logistics and schedules. Celia spent her days handling customer complaints, which she describes as emotional labor disguised as a career. They had developed routines that many couples would envy: morning text messages throughout the workday, dinner together every evening, Netflix binaries on the weekends. To anyone looking in from the outside, they were living the dream. But Celia felt something entirely different on the inside. She describes her marriage to Finn as suffocating in its perfection. According to her, Finn loved her in a way that felt safe but empty. He would come home each evening and ask about her day, but his questions never went deeper than surface level. When she answered that her day was fine, he would simply nod and smile, satisfied that he'd fulfilled his duty as a caring husband. There were no follow-up questions, no genuine curiosity about what she was actually thinking or feeling. Just checkbox conversations that allowed him to feel like he was being a good partner without actually connecting with her on any meaningful level. Celia describes feeling invisible in her own marriage. She felt that Finn assumed she was happy simply because she wasn't actively complaining. He never asked what she needed or wanted from their relationship. Instead, he just did what he believed a husband should do and expected her to be grateful for his efforts. This is the foundation on which everything else would eventually crumble. Everything changed about 8 months into their marriage when a man named Rhodes started working at Celia's company. Now, Celia insists she wasn't the type of woman who went looking for attention from other men. But Rhodes was different in ways that immediately caught her attention. When she spoke, he actually listened. Not the polite nodding that Finn did, but genuine, engaged listening. When Celia complained about difficult customers at work, Rhodes would ask specific questions about what made those interactions so challenging. When she mentioned feeling exhausted, he would notice and bring her coffee without being asked. Rhodes was going through his own struggles at the time. His divorce had recently been finalized, and he was dealing with emotional wounds from his ex-wife, who he claimed had put him through tremendous pain. Talking to Rhodes felt, in Celia's words, like breathing fresh air after being held underwater. Here was someone who understood that life is messy and complicated. Someone who saw her as a complete, complex human being, rather than just a wife filling a role in someone else's life. Their conversations started innocently enough. They would chat during work breaks, have lunch together, and sometimes stay late when they were both working on projects. Celia maintains that she wasn't planning anything inappropriate or looking to cheat. She was simply having conversations that felt authentic instead of the recycled small talk she experienced at home. Rhodes would share stories about his failed marriage and how his ex-wife never truly understood him. In response, Celia found herself opening up about things she had never even told Finn. She confessed how sometimes she felt invisible in her own marriage. How Finn assumed she was content just because she wasn't actively unhappy. How he never asked what she truly needed or wanted, instead just performing what he believed a husband's duties were and expecting appreciation in return. What struck Celia most was that Rhodes seemed to understand these feelings in a way that felt validating. He would say things like how she deserved someone who was genuinely curious about her inner world, and that wanting real connection wasn't asking for too much. These conversations resonated deeply with Celia because they addressed needs she didn't even realize she'd been suppressing. Here's where things get complicated. At first, Celia wasn't even hiding these conversations from Finn. She would mention that she and Rhodes talked during lunch or that he'd helped her navigate a difficult customer situation. Finn's response was always the same, a simple nod and, "That's nice, honey," with absolutely no follow-up questions. No curiosity about who Rhodes was, what they discussed, or whether she enjoyed his company. Just complete disinterest disguised as trust. Meanwhile, Rhodes was asking Celia about everything. What did she think about during her morning commute? What had she wanted to be when she was a child? Did she feel fulfilled in her current life? What were her dreams beyond just surviving each day? Celia emphasizes that these weren't manipulation tactics or pickup lines. They were sincere questions from someone who genuinely cared about her answers. And when she responded, he would remember small details and bring them up in later conversations. This made her feel seen in ways she had forgotten were even possible. After about 2 months of increasingly personal conversations, Rhodes asked Celia a direct question that changed everything. They were working late on a project together, and he asked point-blank if she was happy in her marriage. This was the moment when Celia could have shut everything down. She could have said yes and maintained appropriate boundaries. But sitting there in an empty office with someone who actually cared about her honest answer, she found she couldn't lie. Celia told him the truth. She felt like she was sleepwalking through her own existence. She loved Finn, but didn't feel alive around him anymore. She was exhausted from pretending everything was perfect, when their relationship felt more like roommates who happened to share a bed. Rhodes reached over and touched her hand, telling her he understood completely because he'd felt exactly the same way during his marriage. And instead of pulling away like she probably should have, Celia just sat there, feeling more connected to another human being than she had in months. They talked until nearly midnight that night. When Rhodes walked her to her car, there was a charged moment where they looked at each other, and both knew something fundamental had shifted between them. After that night, their relationship evolved rapidly. They started texting outside of work hours. At first, the messages seemed innocent enough, just checking in or sharing random thoughts. But those texts quickly became the highlight of Celia's day. Rhodes would send her messages about songs that reminded him of their conversations or articles he thought would interest her. Meanwhile, Finn's texts were purely functional, asking what she wanted for dinner or informing her he'd be running late. About 3 months into their friendship, Rhodes began opening up about his loneliness following his divorce. He talked about waking up in his empty apartment with no one to share his thoughts with. He described seeing couples in restaurants or movies and remembering what it felt like to have someone who genuinely wanted to know what was happening in his mind. As Celia listened to him describe feelings that mirrored her own experience within her marriage, something clicked into place for her. One night, while talking in his car after work, Rhodes mentioned wishing he could find someone who understood him the way Celia did. She looked at him and admitted she felt the same way. That talking to him made her feel more connected than she had in years. That going home to Finn after spending time with Rhodes felt like transitioning from vivid color back to black and white. That's when Rhodes kissed her, and she kissed him back. For the first time in years, Celia felt completely alive, present, and wanted. Not just physically desired, but wanted for who she actually was as a person. Rhodes wasn't kissing some performed version of her. He was kissing the real Celia, the one he'd spent months genuinely getting to know. Once that line was crossed, everything else felt inevitable to Celia. She and Rhodes began meeting outside of work, coffee shops across town where they wouldn't encounter anyone they knew, late dinners when Finn thought she was working overtime, weekend afternoons when she told Finn she was running errands. When questioned about the lying involved, Celia's perspective is clear. What was she supposed to do? Tell her emotionally distant husband that she'd found someone who made her feel human again? The physical intimacy developed naturally from their emotional connection. Celia describes how when you're with someone who truly understands you and pays attention to what you need, intimacy becomes a beautiful extension of that connection rather than just another task on a checklist. With Rhodes, every touch carried meaning. Every moment together felt intentional and chosen rather than expected and routine. At home with Finn, Celia began feeling like she was acting in a play where she'd forgotten all her lines. When he tried to be affectionate, it felt foreign, like a stranger's touch. When he said he loved her, it sounded hollow compared to how Rhodes would look at her as if she were the most fascinating person in existence. In Celia's view, Finn loved the idea of her, the wife-shaped space she filled in his life. Rhodes loved the actual her thoughts, her humor, her complexity, even her flaws. But then something unexpected happened. Rhodes started pulling back. At first, the change was subtle. He took longer to respond to messages. He seemed distracted during conversations. He made excuses to cut their time together short. When Celia asked if something was wrong, he blamed work stress or family issues. But she could feel him withdrawing, and it terrified her because she'd become completely dependent on his attention and affection. One evening after they'd been together, Rhodes told Celia he thought they should take a break. Things were getting too complicated, and he needed space to figure out what he wanted. He claimed he cared about her but wasn't sure he was ready for the level of commitment their relationship required. Sitting there listening to what was essentially a breakup, Celia realized how fully she'd invested herself in someone who was now having second thoughts. The following weeks were agonizing for Celia. Rhodes remained polite but distant at work, professional but cold. Meanwhile, she had to go home every night and pretend everything was normal while feeling like her heart was being torn apart. Finn kept asking if she was okay because she was obviously not herself. But how could she possibly explain that she was grieving the loss of what she considered the most meaningful relationship of her life? That's when panic set in for Celia. What if Rhodes told someone about their affair? What if colleagues had figured it out and word got back to Finn? What if she destroyed her marriage for someone who now treated her like she meant nothing? She realized she needed to control the narrative before someone else did it for her. So Celia made the decision to tell Finn herself. Not because she felt guilty or sorry, she claims. She didn't regret loving someone who actually loved her back. But she knew if Finn heard about the affair from someone else, she'd lose any chance of making him understand why it happened. She needed him to see that this wasn't about her being a terrible wife. It was about them having serious problems that needed addressing. Celia planned the conversation carefully. She waited until they were both home on a Sunday evening with no distractions and nowhere to escape. She started by telling Finn she loved him and wanted their marriage to work, but that she needed to be honest about something that had occurred. She explained about her friendship with Rhodes and how it had developed into something deeper because she'd been feeling so disconnected in their marriage. But instead of focusing on the emotional needs that led to the affair, Finn immediately fixated on physical details. When did it start? How many times did they meet? Where did they go? What exactly did they do? Celia felt like he was collecting evidence for some legal case instead of trying to understand what had gone wrong between them. When she attempted to explain that the affair wasn't really about physical intimacy but about feeling seen, valued, and understood, he acted like she was just making excuses. Celia tried to be completely honest about still having feelings for Rhodes. Her reasoning? You can't just turn off love because it's inconvenient. She explained that she was committed to working on their marriage, but she couldn't pretend she didn't care about Rhodes anymore. That would be lying, and hadn't dishonesty partly gotten them into this mess in the first place? But Finn couldn't handle that level of honesty. He wanted her to say the affair meant nothing, that Rhodes meant nothing, that she was completely over it and ready to pretend it never happened. He wanted her to perform remorse and beg for forgiveness instead of having an adult conversation about how they'd reached this point and how they could move forward together. That's when Celia suggested marriage counseling. She believed they clearly needed help communicating and understanding each other's needs. She thought maybe a neutral professional could help Finn see that affairs don't happen in a vacuum, that there are usually underlying issues that need addressing. She hoped a therapist could help him understand that her feelings for Rhodes were a symptom of problems in their marriage, not the root cause. They eventually found a therapist named Dr. Martinez, who Celia felt understood that healing from infidelity requires looking at the whole picture, not just punishing the person who strayed. In their first session, Celia was completely transparent about everything. Feeling invisible in her marriage, finding emotional connection with Rhodes, still having feelings for him that she couldn't simply switch off. She explained that she was committed to rebuilding their marriage, but needed Finn to understand why this happened so they could address the real issues. Dr. Martinez actually validated Celia's feelings, which was such relief after weeks of Finn treating her like a monster. The therapist explained that having ongoing feelings after an affair is normal, and that expecting someone to immediately stop caring about a person they had a deep connection with is unrealistic. She said the goal should be learning to manage those feelings while rebuilding trust and intimacy in the marriage. But Finn completely lost his composure when Dr. Martinez said this. He accused her of taking Celia's side and enabling bad behavior. He couldn't understand that acknowledging feelings wasn't the same as excusing actions. He wanted simple answers. Celia was wrong. He was right. She needed to fix herself. End of story. The complexity of real relationships and genuine emotions was apparently too much for him to process. Over the next several sessions, Dr. Martinez kept trying to get Finn to examine his role in their marital problems. She would ask him about emotional intimacy, communication patterns, and whether he felt he truly knew Celia as a complete person. but he would just deflect back to the affair as if that were the only problem that mattered. He couldn't see that the affair was a consequence of deeper issues, not the root cause itself. After about 2 months of therapy, Finn announced he was done. He claimed Dr. Martinez was biased and that Celia clearly wasn't serious about changing since she still admitted to having feelings for Rhodes. He wanted to find a different therapist, preferably one who would focus on Celia's problems instead of making excuses for her behavior. That's when Celia knew the whole reconciliation attempt was hopeless. Finn didn't want to rebuild their marriage. He wanted to rebuild his version of their marriage where she was grateful, compliant, and never had any needs that inconvenienced him. He wanted her to erase 3 months of what she considered the most meaningful connection she'd ever experienced and pretend it never happened. So Celia told him the brutal truth. She couldn't pretend she didn't love Rhodes because that would be lying. And hadn't lies contributed to this mess in the first place? She was willing to work on their marriage despite her feelings for Rhodes, but she wasn't willing to deny those feelings existed. She believed emotional honesty was the only foundation for genuine intimacy. And if he couldn't handle that, then maybe they weren't compatible after all. That's when Finn completely lost control. He started yelling about how she was choosing Rhodes over him, how she'd never really loved him, how she was a selfish person who destroyed everything good in her life. Celia just sat there thinking about how this emotional outburst proved he'd never really known her at all. Finn called his parents and told them Celia was refusing to get over her affair partner. Suddenly, she was receiving lectures about commitment and marriage vows from people who, in her view, had never had to live with someone who treated them like furniture. Then Finn issued his ultimatum. Either she committed to never mentioning Rhodes again, changed jobs to avoid seeing him, and promised to work on getting over her feelings, or he was filing for divorce, like he was doing her some huge favor by giving her the chance to erase herself for his comfort. So Celia called his bluff. She told him to go ahead and file for divorce because she wasn't going to spend the rest of her life pretending to be sorry for finding someone who actually saw her as a complete person. She'd rather be alone than married to someone who wanted to control her thoughts and feelings. And that's exactly what happened. Finn filed for divorce and made sure everyone knew it was because Celia refused to get over her affair partner. He painted himself as a long-suffering husband who tried everything to save their marriage, while Celia was the heartless wife who chose another man over him. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Finn's attorney painted Celia as an unrepentant cheater who'd refused all attempts at reconciliation. Her own lawyer kept pressuring her to show more remorse, to play up guilt and shame to get a better settlement. But Celia refused to perform regret she didn't feel just to make other people comfortable. Meanwhile, Rhodes wanted nothing to do with any of this drama. When word spread around their office that Finn and Celia were having marital problems, Rhodes made it crystal clear that he considered their relationship over and done with. He started avoiding her completely, acting like she was some unstable ex-girlfriend instead of someone he'd claimed to care about deeply. Apparently, his feelings for her weren't as unshakable as hers were for him. But here's where everything truly fell apart. During the divorce proceedings, it came out that Rhodes had been talking to Human Resources about their relationship the entire time. He'd been documenting everything as inappropriate workplace behavior and had reported it as soon as things got complicated. He basically used Celia to get some kind of workplace protection while completely throwing her under the bus. The company launched an investigation, and guess who came out looking like the unstable one who'd been pursuing her coworker? Rhodes had emails and documentation painting Celia as the aggressor in the whole situation. He'd somehow managed to make it look like she'd been harassing him, and that he'd been trying to maintain professional boundaries the entire time. So not only did Celia lose her marriage, but she lost her job too. The company restructured her position, which was basically a polite way of firing her for being a liability. Meanwhile, Rhodes got promoted to a different department, and everyone acted like he was the victim who'd handled a difficult situation professionally. Celia's family completely turned against her when they found out she'd lost her job over the affair. Her sister said she'd brought shame on the whole family and needed to figure out how to fix her life instead of blaming everyone else for her problems. Her parents stopped taking her calls because they were embarrassed to tell their friends what had happened. Even her few close friends started distancing themselves when it became clear she wasn't going to play the repentant ex-wife role. They wanted her to admit she'd made a huge mistake and promise never to do anything like it again. But Celia couldn't lie and say she regretted finding real connection with someone, even if it didn't work out the way she'd hoped. So here's where Celia stands today, 6 months after her world completely collapsed. She's living in a small studio apartment in Phoenix, having to start her entire life over from scratch. No husband, no job, no family support, no friends who understand what she went through. Everyone treats her like she's this terrible person who destroyed her own life for a fling. But they don't understand, in her view, what it's like to finally feel alive, and then have everyone demand that you go back to being dead inside. The worst part for Celia? Watching Finn move on as if their 3 years together meant nothing. He's already dating someone new, someone she describes as a quiet woman who probably never has an opinion about anything. She sees their pictures on social media, and everyone comments about how happy he looks, how he deserves someone who appreciates him, how he's so much better off without her. And Rhodes? He's engaged now. Apparently, he found someone who was actually available and didn't come with all the complications Celia brought into his life. She heard through mutual work connections that his new girlfriend is everything she wasn't. Single, simple, grateful for his attention, with no messy emotions or inconvenient feelings to deal with. But you know what Celia says? She's still not sorry for wanting more than what Finn was giving her. She's not sorry for finding someone who made her feel like a whole person, instead of just a wife-shaped object filling a role. She's not sorry for refusing to pretend those feelings didn't matter just to make everyone else comfortable. Everyone wants her to learn some lesson about commitment and loyalty, and being grateful for what she had. But the only lesson Celia learned is that most people would rather live a lie than face the truth about what they actually need to be happy. They'd rather stay in dead marriages than risk everything for real connection. So yes, Celia lost everything. But she says at least she knows what it feels like to be truly seen by another person, even if it didn't last. And that's more than most people ever get, even in their so-called successful marriages. If that makes her the villain in everyone else's story, she says she can live with that. Because she'd rather be the villain who was real than the hero who spent her whole life pretending. What do you think about Celia's story? Was she justified in her honesty, or did she destroy her own life through selfishness? The answer isn't as simple as it might seem at first glance. If this story made you think, please hit that like button. Share this video with friends who enjoy thought-provoking stories about real human complexity. And don't forget to subscribe to Mrs. Emma's channel so you never miss another story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about relationships, honesty, and the price we pay for following our hearts. I'm Emma, and I'll see you in the next story.